welcome to the BSG Master YouTube channel, where we cover strategy and advice for the business strategy game. The version from 2019 to current, which is at the moment is 2022. The game itself is copyright and trademarked by Globus Inc. I do not claim ownership of any of the information that we see on the screen at the moment or that we will be going through. That is owned by BSG, the developers at Globus. I am upfront going to be saying that the information I'm going to be providing is covered under the fair use exceptions of the Copyright Act of the United States, and it also is covered by the commentary that is permitted through the First Amendment for free speech and also for the free press. I will be discussing the game in both positive and negative ways. This is not to reflect anything regarding the company itself, but it's necessary for me to provide this information so that you know that it's through fair use that I am commenting on the game for the good of the students and the public, or anybody who is interested in this game, which is conducted in business schools all throughout the world. Who am I? I am an expert in the BSG game. I first played it and won it in my class, in my business class, which is a business strategy class, in 2009. And then also in 2010, I was invited to play in the Invitational tournament, and I won that and was declared to be a BSG Grand Champion. At that time, I was also referred to many of my friends who were also in the business program who were struggling with the game, and I started helping people at my own university, and they started spreading my name around, and I started helping people from other universities. I published a blog, which is currently available at www.winbsg.com. That's WINBSG.com. It's a non-profit site. I do no advertising. It's non-commercial. It's all for educational use. I don't try to sell anything. I operate my advice on basically a charity basis, where I only receive donations from people who want to donate, and no specific amount. I don't require any payment for any of my advice, even though I've helped literally thousands of students. I do it in my spare time for enjoyment, and because I also want to help students do better in the game and to learn more about business in general, which is the whole point of this game. I'm totally against cheating of any form. If your professors say not to get outside assistance, then please don't violate their requests. Most of the professors in most business schools, though, have no problem with seeking public advice on anything that a tutor would do. For example, if you have trouble in calculus, it's normal to hire a calculus tutor who shows you how calculus works. Of course, it wouldn't be appropriate for the calculus tutor to do your homework or do your exams, or basically give you answers to things that you're being tested on directly. And I don't do that either. What I do is I explain how the game works in detail. I use a lot of information from the player's guide, but also I use my years of experience with thousands of students as well to provide information. But I don't want you to trust me. I just want you to listen to what I have to say and I try to explain everything in detail in a way that you can confirm using the game itself. So you don't have to trust me. I also want to warn you about information that is currently available out on YouTube. There is very little information that's of use. Most of it's very, very bad information to follow. One of the reasons for that is a lot of the videos are from a previous version of the game. The game had a major update in 2019. And so any videos that are from the beginning of 2019 or older have advice and information that is no longer appropriate. So don't believe anyone who says, oh, our videos that we did back then are still valid today. They are lying. Unfortunately, the quality of information out there, even for the previous version, was very lousy. So it doesn't get any better when the game changes. So it's important to consider where you get advice from. Okay, so I advise you to be highly skeptical about any advice you get on the web or on YouTube, right? Including me. Okay, I want you to be skeptical. Okay, I want you to use your critical thinking skills. That's what you're supposed to be doing in college, is not merely downloading information to your brain. You should hopefully be learning better skills to evaluate the information you get, to be able to distinguish between bad information and good information by looking at it with a critical eye, by not accepting what you hear at face value. And I'd like you to do that for me too, because I don't want people to trust me. I want you to trust the information based on your evaluation of it. Okay? If the information I say does not hold true, you should not believe it. If it does, then you should build up your confidence based on how it works, okay, and what you see in the game. So that's why I'm very careful when I explain the game, that I'm not just giving you the answers. I'm not giving you just like the winning strategy, and you just put in these items, and in 10 minutes you're going to win the game. No, that's not how the game works. So just to give you some background, normally when I am teaching the students, I teach through Skype or Zoom or some other online software where I don't control the game itself. I just use screen sharing so I can see what they're doing, and I can walk them through the game screen by screen to explain everything one by one, why and how, not just what to do. Okay, I try to explain everything so that students are able to play the game entirely on their own after a few years, okay, yet knowing exactly what they're doing. In fact, what I teach is not only how to learn what to do for yourself, but it's also to study your competitors so that you know what they're doing better than they even know for themselves. And that gives you the biggest advantage in the game, when you know how the game works better than everybody else, not that you have the right answers that someone's feeding you. Okay, so what I do takes a lot of time, and usually for the first year of the game, year 11, to go through all the decisions and explain everything takes me about 6 hours. Okay, so if you're going to be studying on your own and trying to figure out how the game works, you have no experience in how the game works. Okay, so imagine about the amount of time that it would require to do a highly quality set of decisions when you have no experience. Okay, it's going to take a lot more than 6 hours where I'm basically explaining something to you. Okay, and most students aren't prepared for the amount of time that this game requires to research everything. You just reading the player's guide should take you 6 or more hours in study. You should be treating the player's guide not as a thing that you just scan and skim and just barely read, okay? It needs to be something that you have to study in detail. Now, I've already done that many, many times, okay? And so I know the information. So I'm going to help you through that by identifying the aspects of the player's guide that are the most important for your decisions. But that does not absolve you of studying the guide to make sure you understand it. Okay? That's the number one reason why students do badly in this game, is they don't study the player's guide as if it's a final exam study guide. They just skim through it, and the words go into their eyes and just glance off the brain and never get absorbed. Okay? You have to study it in detail. That means the other types of things you would do with a player's guide or with a final exam study guide is you would outline it. Okay? You would print it out and you use highlighter to emphasize the things that are most important. Okay? And also, you have to have your thinking cap on. You have to think about things. What are the implications of the things you learn? Okay? What are the possible ways that you can get around some of the problems that the player's guide describes? Just hearing or seeing that there's a problem does not mean that the game is going to tell you how to fix the problem. So that's where I will come in. I will help you understand some different ways of addressing the problems you'll get in the game. Okay? So that you'll know why the choices that are needed to be made, why those need to be done. Okay? And how they fix the problem. And why other things won't fix the problem properly. Okay? So there's a lot of decisions you could be making incorrectly in this game. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'm looking right now at the front page of the business strategy game, and we're going to go to one aspect of it, which is there's a history of lots of games that have been played in the Best-Strategy Invitational. So again, the Invitational is where there's a 2-week competition that's hosted 3 times a year. And the only people who are invited are the teams who've won their games in their classes. Okay, so this is kind of like the Olympics of this game, and 90% or more of the teams never get here because they don't win. Okay, so this is kind of looking at a higher level of game, but it's very useful because there's a lot of data out here. Okay, so I'm going to hit View Invitational. And we'll view some of the invitational dates. But before I get there, again, I want to stress that the BSG is registered trademark of Globus Software Inc. And all this information is their information, but we're using it for evaluation. So I'm going to go ahead and go into View Invitational. And here we see it tells you about the schedule of that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that right here is past competitions. This is extremely useful. Okay, so I'm going to go to past competitions. And here you see the most recent competition as of this date is August 2022. There's a May, then December, August. So for every year, look how many years it goes back. It goes all the way back down to 2005. Okay, now some of these might not even work anymore, but some of them do. Okay, so this is a lot of information if you really want to study. Now, what this does is when you look at this, you'll see the teams that were playing and invited during that time period. So I'm going to click August 2022. And what this will show is that there were 813 teams invited, okay, to compete, okay, and 37 accepted the invitation to play. So those 37 teams were divided into various industries. Each industry can have a maximum of 12 teams. Okay, so that means that for 37, there were 4 different industries. Okay, so here you can see industry 1. Okay, now these are the teams that ended up finishing. There were other teams that could have been started who were dropped from the game, that were deleted because they basically did so poorly, or they were kicked out because they did not make decisions when they were supposed to. So there's a number of reasons why a team might get kicked out. So again, the maximum number of teams you can have in any industry is 12. Okay, so this industry now has 8. Okay, so this industry here, industry number 2, has 6 teams. Industry number 3 has 6 teams as well. And industry number 4 looks like they have 8 teams. Okay, so you can also see who the players were that were enrolled. Okay, if you highlight this, okay, this shows what the names of the schools are, what the professor's name is for the class that the team originally won in, and then you see some of their scores. Okay, so this is covering the last year of the game. So who's ever on the top here is the winner. Okay, so you can see the footwear industry report for this game, but it only shows the most recent one, which is year 20, which is the final one. Okay, so here you can see it was a pretty close game where one team made a 109 final score and they beat 2 other teams that were 108. Then there was a big drop off from there to 98, 96, 96. So again, if you look at this, 6 teams were in the mid 90s or higher. Okay, that's usually a much higher than what a normal class would get. Okay, a lot of teams do very, very poorly. So if you look at this industry 3, you can see that the one team pulled out quite a bit ahead at 112. So this is overall game to date score. And so the game to date score is the one that determines your final standing. Okay, so this team at 112 was quite a bit higher in points, 7 points higher than the number 2 team. Okay, so if we go to industry 2, here's even a higher score, 112 versus 104. Okay, so that's an 8-point lead. Okay, and in the first industry, we have a 108, 102. Okay, so 6-point lead. But you can see here that in industry 1, there were 3 teams below 50. Okay, so that means they weren't very competitive at all. Okay, in industry 2, everybody's above 68. Okay, in industry 3, there's 1 at 55, but the rest are above 70. And then in the last one, you can see that overall the scores were relatively high. Even the low scores were in the 69, 78 range. So this game had a lot of competition here. So it's a much more difficult game than the one that only had in industry 1. Okay, so that's something you have to consider, is the strategy that's used in the more competitive games might be different than the strategy used in the ones that have less competition. So that means it's possible you might see a team using a strategy here that is okay, not great, but was good enough to beat these other teams by quite a handy margin. Okay, so these FIR reports are very, very useful. Now, they don't contain all the information that you normally have in the game. You know, there's a lot of other reports that are very useful to see what other teams are doing. We don't have that, but at least this information gives us quite a bit that we can go on. So I'm going to just go with industry 1 here and view the FIR report. Okay, so again, this might not be who the winner was. Team 1, okay, rank 1. That's who won the year 20. But again, what matters for this game is the game to date scoreboard. Okay, so here in this case, you can see that Team H was the winner, then Team E, G, F, D, C, I, and A. Okay, so we want to look at, you know, the highest placed teams. Okay, so H, E, and G, to kind of evaluate what strategies they did and why H might have been better than Team E and G. Okay, so if we look at the long-term earnings per share and ROE from just an overall perspective, we can kind of see what happened here. So you can see that Team H, even though they won the game, they were not the highest EPS earner for the whole game. Okay, they had good, respectable values, but where they really improved the most was in the final year of the game. And their weighted average actually was below Team E and F. Okay, but they were close enough to basically get almost as many points here. Okay, so what's used for this game is the game-to-date score. And what they do is the game-to-date score is divided into the investor expectation scores and the best in industry, okay, the BII score. And so your final score for this section of earnings per share is an average of the IE and BII for game-to-date, okay? So Team H had a investor expectation score of 23, and they had a BII of 17. Okay, so the average of that, you would add them together. So 23 plus 17 means that they had a total score of 40 divided by 2 because it's an average. So that means they got 20 points in this section of the game for their final score. So they were beaten in EPS by several teams. They still won the game because apparently they did better in some other categories. Okay, one is you can definitely see they increased their earnings a lot in the last year of the game. Okay, so that very likely could influence their stock price for the last year. Okay, but again, for EPS, it does use a weighted average. That means that every year matters. Okay, so they did well enough, even though they weren't first in all these years, they did well enough to be close at the end. Okay, and so they were able to beat the other teams by quite a few points by doing well in some other categories. Okay, so Team G actually made the most points. They made the maximum points in EPS. Okay, because if you add these two together, you have an IE of 24 and a BII of 20. Add those together, that's a 44. Divided by 2, that's a 22. So they made 22 points in this area. Okay, whereas Team H only made 20 points. So they had a 2-point lead here, but they still did not win. If you look at Team E and F, they had a 24 points for best in industry. They had 24 points for IE, but they had a lower score that only got them 18 points, okay, in the BII. So that means they had a 42 plus divided by 2 means they had a 21-point average, okay, which means that they were 1 point behind Team G and Team H was 1 point behind them. So Team H was actually 2 points behind the leader in this section, okay, of earnings per share. Let's look at ROE. So ROE is a little bit of a different story. Team H had the highest weighted average, okay, by a pretty significant amount, okay? So they ended up with a weighted average of 30.4. The next highest was 25. So they had a consistently higher ROE, okay? And for their game to date, they ended up with 22 points for IE and 20 points for BII. That means they were actually below the maximum points in IE because you could get up to 24 points there. And so it's based against industry average, which is at the top of the graph, okay, at the top of the table. You can see the numbers that are in parentheses. That's the investor expectations. And you get extra bonus points if you are 10%, for each 10% you are above the average. Okay, so the weighted average that was used for year 20 was a 26.0. So every 10% above that, you would get an additional 1 point in IE. So it's possible to get up to 4 points bonus points. So that means a 24 is always the maximum points you can get in game to day score for IE. And Team H, they could have gotten 24 points, but their weighted average wasn't high enough. So at 26.0, that means you need to have a weighted average of 2.6% for each 10%, okay? So times 4, that would be about 9 points above that. Okay, so 2.6 times 2 would be 5.2. So double that would be 10.4. So I guess you need 10.4 points above the weighted average. So if we take 26 plus 10.4, that would be a 36.4. So they did not achieve that. They got 30.4. So 30.4 is only about 4.5 points, or basically 4.4 points above the weighted average. So they only got rounded up to 2 bonus points. Okay, but they certainly got more points than all the other teams, and the other teams that that had lower scores, they weren't that far below. Okay, but let's look at stock price. Okay, here's a huge difference. So Team H had a very high EPS in the final year, and they ended up with a stock price of $318, whereas number 2 was Team F at 258.61, and then the third highest price was Team E at 236. So all the other teams got prorated much lower on their best in industry score, and but even Team H did not get the full 24 points for investor expectation. They lost 1 point there. So again, at $250, it was used for the investor expectation for year 20. You would need to be a full 100 points above that in order to be. So that means you had to have a minimum of a $350 stock price to get that full 24 points or close to it. Okay, so but 318 was still the best. And so whoever has the highest weighted average score or the highest score, they always get the full 20 points for best in industry. Okay, so they had the highest, Team H did, so they got 20 points. Everybody else's score is prorated based on their percentage of the high score. Okay, so Team G, even though they did very, very well in other items, okay, their stock price was basically half of Team H, and therefore they only got 10 points on best in industry versus Team H. And when that's averaged, they lost a lot of points here in stock price. Okay, so if you add their two scores together, it's a 23. Okay, if you divide that in 2, it's going to be a basically like a 11.5. And if you look at Team H, if you add their 23 plus 20, that's a 43. That means they're getting 21.5 points out of the maximum of 22. So they basically only lost a half point versus the maximum. If you look at other companies that had, even Team E, okay, who had some other relatively good scores, they lost a lot of points relative to Team H. Okay, so peaking with a high stock price in the last year of the game is important. Okay, and that can be the difference between whether you win or lose. Okay, so let's look at page 3. So on the credit rating, if you look at the paragraph that's described for credit rating, the last sentence is that the game-to-date credit rating scores are based solely on the most recent year's credit rating performance. So the only year that matters for the final score is year 20. And Team H kind of messed up there. They could have gotten A+, but they didn't. So they lost quite a few. They lost 5 points between the two scores, which means that compared to Team D, E, F, and G, they lost a total of 2.5 points. Okay, so other teams, they could have done quite a bit better if they had just peaked their stock price in year 20, because they also came up to A+ credit rating. That also means a team like Team F that had A's throughout most of the game, you might think that, hey, that must be good. They maintain a good credit rating. No, that's terrible. Okay, because that means they were not using their credit cost effectively. They were not using it to expand more, okay? When you take a lot of loans out and you use that money for expansion and investments, of course your credit rating goes down, okay? And it takes us sometimes several years for those investments to reap the rewards to get back up to a good credit rating, okay? So the idea of having a good credit rating for the whole game is a very, very bad idea, because it means you don't know how to use leverage. And that means you're limiting yourself to your expansion based on your current profits, when it's probably a better idea to use credit wisely to expand greater and spend more money on upgrades and other things like that to improve your operational efficiency, so that you can make more money in the midway through the game and through the end of the game. Okay, so that very well could be a reason why Team F did not win. And look at Team H. Team H had credit rating that all the way went down to C+. Okay, and many times the winners go down to C or C minus. Okay, but one of the traits are they usually almost always get up to A or A+. Okay, and Team H here did make a mistake there by not getting to A+, but it apparently didn't hurt them enough to kill their position in the game. Okay. Now, if we look at image rating, okay, so here's another big difference in this game. Only Team H really sought to get 100 for the beginning part of the game, okay? And this uses a 3-year average, okay? So game-to-date scores are based on an average of the most recent 3 years. So the game final score, the game-to-date score, is based only on the last 3 years of the game, which in this case, their game ended in year 20, and therefore only the years of 18, 19, and 20 were used. And Team H had a high enough score that they got the highest score in the game. Did they get the maximum score they could have gotten? No. But apparently nobody scored more than they did, so they didn't at least lose ground based on image. Okay. And there was only one other team that tied them, and that would be Team G. Okay, but again, Team G made a huge mistake with a low stock price. Okay, so Team E was half a point down from them. So 21 plus 19 means that would be a score of 40, which would be divided by 2 would be a score of 22. And I'm sorry, would be a score of 20. Whereas Team H got 1 point higher. So if you add those two numbers together, they got a 41, which divided in half would be a 20 and a half. Okay, so that like half a point better. Okay, but so somehow, basically, Team H won it. They certainly, nobody got better than Team H on image. They lost 2.5 points in credit rating. Okay. If we go back to EPS, ROE, and stock price, really the difference in this game was stock price, because they gained 3.5 points on all their competitors with their average stock price. So that made up for the problems that they had in credit. Okay. ROE, they were the leader there, but only compared to other teams. Okay, only by a couple points. So compared to Team E, they were about 3.5 points ahead of Team E and more points from other teams. So ROE had a big factor, whereas earnings per share, their total was basically slightly lower, 1 point lower than teams E and G. Okay, and they were actually a little bit even further behind Team G. Okay, so really what the team did, okay, was do something to help them in year 20. But let's look at what they were building and what they did. So I'm going to go to page 4. So this is really the most important page, because this at the bottom of the screen shows where everybody built their factories. Okay, And so Team H chose a strategy of shutting down their North America plant. Okay, so here you can see that their equipment that they had in North America was zero. They did not build a EA factory, or at least they didn't keep it going. And they did a big AP factory and a much bigger LA factory. Okay, now, is that what helped them win the game? Well, possibly, compared to the other teams. Notice that none of the other teams had a large European plant. Okay, they teams C and D had a relatively small one at 4,000. There is normally enough demand to do a plant of 5,000 or 6,000 there. So it would be possible that they could have won the game with that type of strategy and with NA, but they'd also have to make sure that the plants that they built in NA and EA had the right upgrades to lower their cost of production. Okay, whereas Team I made a big mistake by having a factory of only 2,000 in EA, and that's never going to be cost effective. Okay, because your fixed cost will be too high per pair. So that has a very terrible economy of scale. If we look at what other teams are doing in other factories, Team D had a very small factory in LA. Okay, that's way too small. They could have, and so notice that the teams that did well, okay, usually are going to have larger factories. Okay, so this is important. Okay, now in another game, you might see that a team could win again with a different strategy here. Okay, but in general, they're going to have big factories. Okay, everywhere, or big factories in just one or two areas. Okay. Okay, so if we look at the price trends and celebrities in page 8, okay, this is a common thing in the Invitational where people start spending way, way too much on celebrities. So all the celebrities are maxed out at $30 million. Okay, that's crazy. Okay, now Team H also did do some of that, but they limited their costs. Okay, so if we look at the consumer appeal for year 21, basically it's based on so again, teams will actually be bidding in year 20, even though it's no longer valid. But again, Team H had a reasonable consumer appeal that indicated they really only had about 3 celebrities. Okay, and actually in the actual year 20, it looks like they only had 2 celebrities going. They had a celebrity, Kimmy and Steph. But in any case, you can see that quite a few other teams had a lot of celebrities and they still lost. Okay, so Team F had a higher celebrity value for year 21, okay, than Team H. But did it help them win? No, they did not. Okay, so also let's look at the pattern for pricing in SQ. Okay, so here we had a very interesting thing. So it's very common for year 11 and year 12 for the prices to go up, okay, and the SQ to go up, okay? But very soon, the SQ started going down, okay, while the prices remained relatively stable. And then in year 15, SQ went quite a ways up from a 6-star up to a 7 point, looks like a 7.25 around that, or 7.5. Okay, then it shot right back down. So it looks like a lot of teams might have tried going high quality, and then the prices of superior materials might have gone way up. Okay, but you can see that for the rest of the game, that the prices basically came down. Okay, and quality remained relatively stable until the last year of the game, where some teams probably raised their prices a little bit to take advantage of to get a higher margin in the last year. Okay, so we see that same pattern was in every single region. Okay, again, prices went up, then flattened out, went up a little bit here, then came down, and then same in Latin America. Okay, so this is useful information. If we also look at some of the financial statistics, okay, we can look at some other things that will affect the teams. So one is, let's look at the income statement data, and we'll see that Team H has private label sales. Okay, so private label is very important to maintain profitability because it helps your economy of scale. You don't even need to win and have the lowest prices on the private label. Okay, the main thing is you want to try to win the bids without, even if you don't make a lot of money. Okay, because it actually it saves you more money in wholesale and branded. That's because when you win a bid in private label, some of the costs are shared on a prorated basis. Okay, so in this case, the total sales for all regions and branded and internet for Team H was $1.4 billion. Okay, the revenues in private label were less than 10% of that, but that means around 8% of the costs for many elements of wholesale was actually covered by private label. So that helps to improve profitability of internet and wholesale. So you want to be competitive on private label throughout the whole game as much as possible. Okay. Also notice that Team H did not have the highest cost of pairs sold. Team A had spent almost twice as much. Okay, but they didn't have twice as much revenue. So Team A was going for a very, very expensive product, apparently. Okay, and also Team A had higher warehouse expense. Okay, but they spent less on marketing. Okay, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. That also explains why their net profit is so low. Okay, so you cannot win this game by just spending a lot of money on shoes and then not marketing them. Okay, so Team H had apparently a very efficient production. They weren't even number 2 in cost of pairs sold. There was another company, Team C, that had a higher cost of pairs sold. So when you consider that they had a very high revenue, okay, even though they didn't have the highest revenue, they were apparently at a very profitable basis, and they spent a lot of money on marketing, but not the most. Okay, so they had more of a balanced approach. They ended up with an operating profit that was significantly higher than their competitors. Okay, at almost $359 million versus Team E, which was in second place on operating profit at basically 300. Okay, so it's significantly more than 10%, basically almost 20% higher operating profit than Team E for the last year of the game. Team H also had quite a bit of debt still because they still were paying $26 million in interest. Okay, but in general, they were able to clear more money on net profit than any other team at $232 million versus Team E at 203, and then the others were quite a bit lower than that. Okay, so Team F at 176 and Team G at 167 million. Okay, so if we look at the balance sheet data, we can also see that some teams, okay, were still buying stock in the last year of the game, and because we see stock sale purchases, and the problem is that when you buy stock, the full effect takes 2 years to happen because the game calculates the ROE based on the average of shareholders' equity, and when you buy back stock, you only affect the ending shareholders' equity for the year, and so it's divided by 2 basically because it's an average. So you never buy a lot of stock in the last year of the game. If you can avoid it, it's better to buy back stock prior to year 20. Okay, so in general, most of the teams had cash on hand that was sufficient, so they didn't run out of cash, so they didn't run into bad loans. But also look at Team H. They have very low long-term loans, but it's not zero. Okay, they ended up with about $43 million in long-term loans, which is still better than quite a few of the other teams. Okay, but you don't have to have zero. Okay, so they did a pretty good job of lowering it, and they ended up with an A Some of the other teams did a little bit better because they ended up with A+, but again, it proved to not be the deciding factor in their game. So the other thing is, if we look at selected financial statistics, okay, and if we look at the gross profit margins, the operating profit margin, the net profit margin, you can see that Team H ended up with the highest net profit margin, okay, or second highest, okay. So even though their profit margin wasn't quite as high as Team F, apparently their sales were better, okay, because they made more money, but also they had a pretty good situation with their shares of stock outstanding. So you're allowed, everybody starts with 20 billion shares, and you are allowed to buy back up to 5 billion shares. And Team H and Team F and Team D and Team C all achieve that. So when you buy back the maximum amount of shares, that acts as a multiplier for your EPS, and the money you pay for that stock affects you positively on your ROE. Okay, so Team H did that pretty effectively. They were buying stock throughout most of the game, which is one reason why they probably had a higher ROE, ended up with above average ROE for the whole game. And that was one of the deciding factors for that. Team G had 1,000 more shares left outstanding, and so that means they weren't getting as high a multiplier. Team A, which is one of the last place teams, they sold shares. Okay, so that's one of the marks of a bad team, is selling shares. They don't even realize that there is a multiplier effect, and so selling shares at the beginning of the game, especially, is one of the worst things you can do in this game. Okay, so I'm going to go and look at production benchmarks briefly. Okay, so one problem with the FIR report for the Invitational is they don't actually show you any of the details for your company, but you can see the highs and lows. So in North America, if we look at workforce productivity, you can see that there is a team that has a much higher productivity than other teams. Okay, so that means they probably are doing something different, and they are probably using an upgrade. Okay, and so in North America, the labor cost is rather high. So if we look at the regular compensation in North America, the average is around 45 million or 45,000 per employee. The high, some team paid 70,000 per employee. Okay, and the supervisory compensation is closer to 80, basically 79.4. Okay, and then the high was 96. Okay, so the cost of labor is a lot higher in North America than in other regions. Okay, look at Europe, Africa, and you'll see the regular compensation there is 27,758, and the high is 38. But then look at Asia, it's 15,548, and Latin America 16,027. So basically around 16,000 or less. Okay, again, compared to North America, okay, it's more than 3 times higher. Okay, so that's a problem. Now, some team was able to pay only $5.53 of labor per pair, whereas another team ended up paying $12 a pair. Okay, so even though the overall compensation is a lot higher in North America, it's possible to reduce the cost per pair. Okay, so here you can see that one team paid more than twice as much as the low team. Okay, and also notice that $5.53 in North America, that's actually cheaper than the average in Europe. Okay, now it's higher. The 553 is higher than the average in Asia, but not by $4 or $5. Okay, so notice that there is a team in Asia that actually was paying higher than 555. Okay, So that means it's possible to get your labor costs within $1 or $2, okay, of the average in Asia, okay? But there's only really one way to do that, okay? You can't do it by just cutting the salaries of everybody, okay? Because the productivity will go terrible that way. But if we look at the workforce productivity in Asia, it's a lot lower than in North America. So that should be your clue as far as what the solution is in North America. It's not cutting the salaries, it's actually increasing the salaries and buying the D upgrade, which is for robotics, which increases your productivity by 50%. So that's how a team can go from a 5,000 average productivity, okay, up to 7,500. So if you had 5,000 plus 50%, that's going to put you already into the 7,500 range, okay? And you can see there is a team that or there were teams that have an average of 53, but that may be an aberration, okay? It may be that most of the teams are in the 4,000 and one or two teams have 7,500 because they bought the D upgrade, okay? And that could skew the average to make it look like it's higher. So basically, the teams that did the right upgrade in North America can benefit a lot and lower their labor costs. So they are the teams that have the low labor cost of under $6. The teams that have the high labor cost, they might have increased salaries, but they did something that hurt their productivity. So having a productivity of 4,200 is much lower than what they started with. Okay, so teams are making mistakes there. Okay, so that's part of your clue as far as how to solve the problem in North America, is to buy the D upgrade, which increases the productivity by 50%. Okay, but in Asia and Latin America, notice that the highest productivity there is in the 4,800 range, 4,900 range. Okay, so if they started in the 4,000 range, okay, and if you increase their productivity by 50%, that would put their productivity into the 6,000 range. So it looks like nobody in this game bought the D upgrade for Asia and Latin America. And that's usually the proper choice because the cost of labor is so much cheaper anyways. The labor is not a problem here. The labor is good, okay? So you don't need an expensive upgrade to fix it, whereas in North America, you do. Okay, so if we go back to Europe, we can see that it has a higher cost of labor because it has a higher compensation. So the salaries are higher than in Asia and in Latin America, but it's actually below North America. So it's kind of in between. It does have a labor problem, but maybe the labor isn't enough to pay a tariff to send shoes there from another area that has a lower labor cost. So that's why having a factory in Europe does make sense, especially because you could do the D upgrade if you needed to. But even so, if you look at the production labor costs, the low was 634 for at least one team there. Okay, so if you compare that to the average labor cost in Asia, okay, it's still only about $2.20 higher. Okay, so there may be ways that you could save that money by, for example, not paying the tariff. Okay, so the tariff is $6 there. So you're saving $6 by not producing in Asia and sending it over there. Plus, you have an extra $1 of shipping that you're saving by keeping the production in the same area as where the warehouses are. So giving up $2 in labor per pair could be worthwhile to save $6 in tariff and an extra $1 in freight. That's why having a plant in Europe could be a good strategy if you start on it early and you get it upgraded soon, as that way you could take advantage of it and get it to a big size or relatively big by the middle of the game. Okay. So that is for the production benchmarks. So let's also look at the operating benchmarks. So here you can see that there is quite a wide range in profitability between the best teams and the worst teams. Okay, so you can see that in North America, the operating profit margin for wholesale is 22%. Okay, which is quite a bit higher than the 15% average. Okay, same with Europe. Okay, same with Asia. Okay, same with Latin America. So the highest performing teams could be making a lot more profit than the average teams. Okay, and if you look at this, there are teams that are losing a lot of money. Okay, so there's a lot of room for optimization to make sure that you get the best value added for your resources, for your materials, for your employees, versus what you get out in quality and other competitive factors. And if we look also at private label, you can see that even in the last year of the game, there were teams that were, on average, most teams made money there. Okay, but there were some teams that lost money there. Okay, so but at least one company was making over $2 a pair there. But the main reason why you bid on private label is not for the money you get from this margin. Okay, it's first of all you get image points for every region where you win a bid. So normally you get about 2 image points. So if you win all 4 bids, that means it's going to boost your image by 8 points. In a very cost effective, so you could actually make money and make image. So almost every other form of image costs you money. This is an image that makes you money. Okay. Now you also could improve your cost of wholesale because again the costs are shared between private label when you win bids versus wholesale. So basically, the purpose of private label is to not make a huge amount of money in private label. The purpose is to get image at a very cost-effective rate and to improve your profitability of wholesale through economy of scale by keeping your factories fully utilized. Okay. So that's kind of an overview from just one industry. Now, it's better to look at more than one industry to kind of get a feel for what the various options are. So I'm going to go back and we'll look at another industry. Okay, so what I'll actually do here is we'll go to another industry, like here in industry 4. Let's view the FIR for this region. Okay, so here you see, so here's a difference where one team was in first place in year 20, but they did not win the game, Team B. Okay, even Team D did not win the game. It was Team E. Okay, and they won it by 1 point. Okay, above Team D and B, Delta and Bravo. Okay, so let's go to page 4. Okay, so there's a big difference here then between these teams. Okay, so again, if we go back to the scoreboard, it's not Team B, but Team E. Okay, then D and B. So let's go back. So Team E, where did they have stuff built? Okay, so Team E had a very large European plant. Okay, not as big as the other teams, but apparently they did a better job with it. Okay, and they had a kind of more of a balanced approach for AP and LA. Okay, and then they shut down the North America plant. Okay, so this is a different configuration than the other team that won. Okay, so you would think that maybe a huge factory in AP and LA would be better than have EA, but apparently Team E was able to make a cost-effective use of EA. So that means they were not paying tariffs in EA, AP, or LA, and the only tariff they were paying was just the $4 tariff in North America. Okay, so there's a number of reasons for that. They could have decided early on that it just wasn't worth investing money in the North America plant. Okay, whereas some of the other teams did buy plants in other areas, but again, they probably made some mistakes. So like Team A, they only had a 1,000 plant in 1,000 size plant in EA. Well, that's going to make a very high cost of production, and also that means that they could not supply all of EA from the EA plants. So that means they were still paying tariffs. Same with Team J. Team J, these two plants that are really small, the 2750 in North America and the 1750 in EA, that is a plant that's way too small. Also notice their LA plants, way too small at 2,000, because that's not going to have a very effective economy of scale. You don't have enough shoes to bring down the cost of production for all the fixed costs. Okay, so this is kind of just a look at the data that's available in the Invitational. Each industry has its own set of challenges, okay? So we could look at another one briefly. Let's look at Industry 3 to see, so Team I, then D and F. Look at what Team I did here. Okay, so I'm going to go to page 4 to look at their factory configuration. So Team I had the same configuration, okay, as the winner in the other industry. They had a big EA, a relatively big AP and LAs, and no North America. Okay, and they beat the other teams pretty handily. So they had the largest plant in EA. Okay, so apparently they were able to handle demand there. Okay, so the teams that had a plant in North America all lost. Okay, but also look at their overall production. Okay, Team I had 34,000 of capacity in equipment. Okay, quite a bit larger, 6,000 larger than their nearest competitors, D and F. Okay, so again, that means they're going to have a very good economy of scale. Okay, that they can have lower prices and still make more money, because at that level of scale, the cost per pair is going to be driven down quite a bit. Okay, so again, if we go back to see who the second and third places teams were. Okay, so F and D. Okay, so then F, D, and A. So let's go back to page 4. Okay. So Team F and D, they both had an identical configuration in the end, but they lost. So they did have a good economy of scale in AP and LA, and they did not have a plant in A, but they did not have a big plant in EA. Okay, so that means they were paying an extra $7 a pair for every shoe that they sent to Europe. Okay, so apparently that could have been a major factor in Team I beating them in the game. Okay, so let's look at the EPS for Team I, and they also very well could have peaked in the final year of the game. So I'm going to go to page 2 to the EPS. Okay, so here it's pretty obvious why Team I did so much better. Okay, they were the first place team on EPS for the last 5 years of the game. They really just outpaced them, and then if you look at in year 19 and 20, okay, basically both actually 18, 19, and 20, they really pulled ahead. And the other teams, they had apparently a big problem in year 19 that Team I did not experience. So they had a little bit lower EPS, but still a much higher level than Team D and F. And then in year 20, Team I really soared. Okay, so they were $13 ahead on the EPS versus their nearest competitor. So this is going to have a big impact on the ROE and also the stock price. And again, the stock price matters most in the last year of the game. So also they ended up with, Team I ended up with a weighted average quite a bit higher than the other teams. So even though the other teams did improve their earnings, they fell behind in profitability. Okay, so it's not that the team D and F did badly in general. Okay, but they just could not figure out the way that Team I was able to accelerate their earnings, and probably the tariff made a major part of that. Okay, and perhaps the upgrades that they did. Okay, so if you look at ROE, Team I actually just had a competitive one, but they did not have the highest. Okay, and in year 20, they were second to last place on ROE. Okay, but still they had enough built up. They had some really good ROE years in the middle. Okay, so that means they still ended up with a very good weighted average at the end. So they only lost 1 to a half a point versus their competitors in ROE. Okay, because again, these averages are divided by 2. Okay, so they were only 1 point off of Team D and half a point off of Team F. Okay, but let's look at stock price. So yeah, you can see here the stock price. Team I was definitely much higher in stock price in the last year versus their competitors. Okay, so basically a 720 versus a 540, that's a major difference there. So that's probably what won them the game, because they only ended up 1 point ahead of the other teams. Okay, so that was really the critical factor here for them, is they did well enough. They certainly beat the other teams on EPS. Okay, but when it comes to the final score, that really only accounted for half of a point versus Team F. Okay, and only 2.5 points versus Team D. Okay, so stock price is where they really pulled ahead, because they made 3 points higher than Team F. Okay, and basically 2.5 points above Team D in the game to date stock price versus in the point category. And the other items, if we just look at image and credit rating, so Team I achieved an A+ credit rating, so nobody gained points on them. Okay, so Team D and F actually lost points. Okay, that was silly. Okay, you should, especially Team D had an A+ in year 19, and they hurt their credit rating somehow. Okay, so they lost a lot of points in this category. So they both lost about 5 total points. Divided by 2 means Team D and F lost 2.5 points in the game, just due to getting an A versus A+. Okay, if we look at image, Team I was going for high image for most of the game. Basically, they got up to 100 in year 14. They stayed the leader for the whole game, and even in year 19, where they ended up 97, they still ended up with a 99 average, and that gave them quite a bit of a lead here. So the second place team in image was Team F with a 21 and 16, or actually Team A with 21-17. That still was quite a bit fewer points, and Team A was not even competitive. So really, Team D and F lost a lot of points because they did not have a high image. Okay, so it's very interesting to watch, these other teams that are high performing teams, to learn how they work. Okay, so that's it for now. So I'm going to go ahead and just start covering more details of the game, but it's very important to go through the information that you have, so you can decide based on analysis. Okay, see what other teams are doing. Okay, don't just guess. Okay, and do analysis based on, why would a team do better by having a Europe factory? Okay, why would they do better by shutting down a North America plant? Okay, it may be possible that a team could have a large North America plant and beat other teams. Okay, so as long as the factories are big enough and they have the right upgrades. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take a break now, and we'll cover some of the aspects of the coaching that I normally give in year 11 for all different aspects of the game in future videos. So thank you for tuning in. Don't bother doing like and subscribe. I don't really care a whole lot. I'm not making money on this. If you want to do that, that's fine. But really, I'm just here to help you learn how to play the game. I'm happy if you have a better score in your game because you understand what to do because how the game works. Okay, so hopefully you'll tune into my other videos. Thank you very much.